Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
In this real side experience, I would be in the company of a small group of individuals that, although the personal self had no recognition of them based on their appearances alone, impressions would reveal they were those on their respective processes of awareness, and we were traversing through what seemed to be a vast supermarket-like complex. As we proceeded, I was as though preparing my group for what was to come. At this stage of the experience, however, only the real awareness, with its creational oversight, being part of the isness everything that animates through all consciousness-affected simulation as it does, would have the realization of what was yet to unfold, the personal self sitting back and simply observing the animation of my simulation-inserted form as orchestrated by the real awareness, and where an exchange of a dialogue in regards to the next stages of the experience between the group and myself, where preparation was required, would fail to be recollected as to its specifics on waking. The scene would promptly fade, and now the group and myself were in a dimly lit chamber of some kind, in the presence of 3 curious body forms, a muscular and very powerfully built ape-like creature, an eagle far larger than is typical of the species, and a venomous serpent of an approximate length of 30 feet by my estimation. These 3 body types were forms where the secondary personal self had been established, as opposed to being body types prior to the formulation of the secondary self, as most animal body types will generally be, for at a certain stage in the creational process, a body form is assumed where the free will ability to generate ideas via the body vehicle mechanics becomes so, whereas, up until that moment, the real awareness was directly animating through the body types that, although are operating within the simulators, are doing so while maintained as the nowness real awareness everything is position. As ideas are free will created, so this nowness everything position is momentarily removed from. For to experience isolated parts and pieces, ideas of the whole, so this is a secondary position aside from the isness everything. The establishing of what is then this secondary position is the conception of the created personal self. The idea then being to create and experience what we free will decide via the personal self, but then to resume the nowness, real awareness, everything position aside from the ideas of a mind and emotion, that through a comparison of the two positions can eventual recognition of the everything is a true reality be determined in relation to the parts and pieces, the ideas made possible to isolate from the whole via creational mechanics. Generally, the individual becomes lost in the fabrication of unreal creational simulation, personal self immersed and operating, somewhat disconnected from the real awareness, true being self and reality, and where the created consciousness, identities, traits, and inclinations, the secondary self, takes on a seeming life of its own, as though we are absorbed into the consideration that an avatar we play in a computer game is what we actually are. These three body forms then, despite their design, that of ape, eagle, and snake as I said, were secondary personal self-immersed and operating, but they were of great significance nonetheless, in a way that wasn't made apparent in the experience. For despite operating as the personal self, through the decided development of a consciousness, so individuals can effect for themselves creational circumstance and body form where they are in positions of greater influence than others, especially if agreement has been trod which afford ability to impact on vast simulator scales into the experiential affairs of others, agreement being the necessity, as nothing can transpire between individuals absent of it, regardless of a body form's might or capability. These three body forms were such individuals, and imperative was it seemingly to secure their agreement. For just as beings have positioned themselves where they have extensive agreement to swing then simulator situations on an equally as vast scale, this agreement can be wielded in ways that can be destructive and oppressive, but just as readily can be awareness and a life benefiting. Hence the prudence in constantly attempting to approach such beings, that they may be encouraged to bring their reach and influence to bear in regards to the beneficial galactic projects, etc. The three beings were of a particular consciousness attitude-wise, initially somewhat abrasively inclined, and their immediate reaction to our presence was to engage with us aggressively. As I mentioned, as agreement dictates a simulated experience, and in regards to that which can transpire between individuals, only if I have within my consciousness the ideas installed that other body forms can harm me, can this be my simulated reality in relation to them. Absent of such agreement, and any attempt by others to administer harm upon myself will be met with failure, and as the process of awareness does involve a releasing of all ideas of consciousness, we become progressively ever more untouchable in creation. This would be the case here. The assailing efforts of what impressions had revealed as three very creationally powerful beings would have no bearing, as I lacked agreements in relation to them that this could be so, and they would be nullified, they would relent, and return to simply standing before the group and myself. It seems we were no closer to gleaning their assistance in regards to the galactic endeavours, and where now one of my group took it upon himself to also attempt to engage with them, they would automatically attack him also, and where necessary was it for me to come to the group members' aid. For although I lacked agreements in regards to these three beings dictating their inability to harm me, this wasn't the case for the individual in my group, and I had to extricate him from the hostilities of the three body types. As the ape creature pounded on him, the eagle struck with a talon and a beak, and the snake tried to envenom him with its toxic bite. The three creatures once again would eventually relent, as I stood in protection over the group, they realizing that to persist was pointless, and as moments passed, it seemed they became placated. As creationally powerful as they were, and operating with the consciousness of personal self-compulsion, of abrasiveness, as was their seeming inclination overall, it was as though they were momentarily able to see through themselves enough, their personal self-creations and consciousness proclivities, to determine the nonsensical nature of continuing to engage with the group and myself antagonistically. I would find myself then immersed in a verbal exchange with them, and slowly would bring them around to deciding to now operate in ways that are life and awareness beneficial. I wouldn't recall precisely what was spoken, just the overall sense of it, and the exact identities of the three beings wouldn't be revealed, just that they were individuals of immense and agreement-backed creational power and standing, and so would undoubtedly prove to be valuable assets, should they indeed proceed to be motivated into assisting us. The scene would fade, and I would find myself deployed, as though to scout out a particular region of creation where gargantuan creatures seemed to be roaming, the body forms of such somewhat difficult to describe in a light of inadequate personal self-references to draw upon and compare by, but of extreme size and the sense of wings perhaps, or appendages of some kind that afforded elevation to a degree. Oftentimes on the real side, we can be described as destructive idea clean-up crews. For as ideas always reflect their nature, as destructive ideas must therefore self-implode, we can be deployed to be the delivery mechanism for this, as though tidying up the multi-dimensions of creation. Such idea creations can express as simulated features, environments, and even body forms, for it is so that every thought we create will manifest its nature other-dimensionally, and at some stage physical level, and where thoughts can take form and be as rampaging monsters capable of affording harm on the real side. Destructive thought-form monsters that must self-implode in reflective accordance with their abrasive natures, but rather than let the effects play out as they will, and the destruction be wrought additionally, we can step in and nullify, neutralize these ideas prior to the damage they may have caused. In regards to body forms as effected from a consciousness, the same principle applies, that of self-implosion due to decided abrasiveness, effects that will become manifest. We always are the reflection and mirror of ourselves, but effects that can be managed prior to their destructive impact being exacted. We can, as an example, displace such body forms that they are no longer in positions to exact harm unto others, which wouldn't be a violation of a free will, just an alternative effect delivered to that which the abrasively driven individual would have experienced anyway. The real side simulation of our involvement as a karmic delivery accrues, if you will, can express in various ways, on occasion as though we are destroying other forms, whereas in reality we are neutralizing the idea that is affecting them, putting them out of the way, that they are beyond the ability to impact others adversely, be they body forms, as effected from a consciousness, or thought form monsters. In actuality, both will be affected from consciousness idea formulation, as everything simulated, body forms included, in fact are. These enormous body forms would be viable candidates for removal, destructively inclined were they, the effects of themselves to be managed that they would be displaced, the ideas that they were removed from creation. As I said, I had been deployed as though a scout, determining the creature's location, which was a vast tropical jungle, though comprising of several levels, and where the wings of the creatures were required that they had full access to the entirety of their environment. I would be positioning myself in such a way that I could as though isolate them individually and remove them one by one, for given the opportunity, they would swarm me, that although wouldn't necessarily be problematic, would make my task more arduous. I would as though draw the attention of them one by one, and as they became isolated from all others of their kind, I would engulf them in what appeared to be blue fire, and they would promptly vanish, the ideas that they were neutralized. Interestingly, they were not the only body form or thought forms prevalent in the jungle environment, for present also were as though tribes of ape-like creatures, reminding me a little of the depictions of extremely prehistoric human body forms. These were body forms as effected from consciousness, not simply forms as manifested through thought as the larger creatures may have been. They coexisted with the huge winged body forms, and rather revered them as though by their consideration the huge creatures were gods of a kind. The ape beings were forms where the secondary personal self had been established. They lived in basic, rudimentary makeshift huts, and sported crude piercing weapons, spears and the like. That although I was simply removing the destructive ideas that were the large winged beasts, this didn't sit well with the ape people who deified them, and as I went about my karmic clean-up operation, so I would be cautious to not only draw the winged creatures from others of their kind for ease of removal, but from the tribal villages of the ape people, as they would be inclined to attack me, as from their perspective I was destroying their gods. My assignment would be continuous. There seemed to be copious quantities of these winged beasts throughout the tropical environment, and the scene would fade as I was proceeding with it. In keeping with the theme of the scene, I had just departed from, so another highly placed dark force character would be targeted for displacement. The egregious karma he had effected for himself, in reflective accord with his choices, actions and deeds, was due. A managing of his effects that he could be removed from his ability to further impact others adversely, as was his continuous inclination. The identity of the individual wouldn't be revealed but for the impression of his form being human, though very likely reptilian in actuality, as he was another key asset of the controllers that ensured the perpetuation of their simulator control. I would be among other individuals, though an altogether different group from the one I had been in where this experience began, and there would be a further individual requesting volunteers from this group to track down the dark force asset and ensure his displacement. Very likely the individual making this request was a real guide, that although they could readily have undertaken the objective themselves, they were inviting others to participate and execute the assignment. For as we are the reflection of ourselves, as everything equals itself, if we operate in beneficial ways, life and awareness are speaking, so in turn our awareness benefits. We earn our progression into the endless recognition and standing with the true reality. Of those assembled, myself and one other would volunteer, and we would be dispatched to the target's whereabouts, that we be the delivery mechanism of effects he had accrued for himself, the displacing of another destructive dark force operating a character. Although I wouldn't witness what transpired, safe to assume we carried out our assignment, as after all, impossible is it to evade or avoid our effects. We always must face ourselves and our creations. As DUANE often mentions, everything shows up eventually, and there the experience would end.